Hi everybody, Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, and today's contract tip has to do with a seller making multiple counter offers to buyers. This is tied in to the concept of highest and best as well. So, let me ask you a couple of questions. First of all, for you agents working with buyers, how many simultaneous offers may a buyer make to purchase multiple properties? How many multiple offers can a buyer make simultaneously at the same time? The answer is as many as the buyer wants to, as long as either the buyer has, as long as the buyer has the money to purchase all the offers that get accepted, or if there are contingencies in those offers where a buyer may terminate should that property or properties not suit their needs. So as long as either the buyer has money to buy more than one property at a time, or again, there are outs where the buyer's legal rights and earnest money are protected should they terminate within a certain time frame. Buyer can make multiple offers simultaneously. Now, how many offers, or for the purposes of our conversation, it would be counter offers, may a seller make simultaneously? In other words, if a seller has received multiple offers from different buyers, may the seller make a counter offer back to more than one buyer at the same time? Think about that. That's what this video is about. The general answer is no, or no, yes, but with an extreme amount of caution. Now, why is that? Well, as I mentioned, a buyer, if they have money or contractual protection, they can buy more than one house at a time. We've got several investors we work with who buy more than one house at a time. Those are great buyers to work with. A seller only has one house to sell. A seller may only sell the house to one buyer. A seller cannot sell the house in a legally binding contract to more than one buyer. So, you run the risk, if a seller makes a multiple counter offer, you run the risk of a seller engaging in two legally binding contracts to sell their one house to two people. Can't do that. The seller will have to negotiate with one of those buyers. If that were the case, the seller would have to negotiate with one of those buyers to terminate the contract. And typically that gets negotiated, hopefully outside of court, in which there would be some sort of financial settlement between the seller and one of the buyers and the broker that was working with that buyer. Or it would go to court and a judge would decide which contract would go through as a transaction and which contract the seller would have to financially compensate the buyer because the seller would have sold one house to two people. The reason I say you would have engaged in two legally binding contracts is due to the definition of a binding contract. So let me read you what it says in the GAR contracts, but this is absolutely the same in the RE forms. So in the definition of a binding contract is the same, but it is in the purchase and sale agreement under the definition section. It is in the standard terms under the definition section. And it says the binding agreement date is the date when the party to the transaction who has accepted an offer or counteroffer to buy or sell real property delivers notice of that acceptance to the party who made the offer or counteroffer in accordance with the notices section of the agreement. Once that occurs, this agreement shall be deemed to be a binding contract. And again, the definition is the same, binding under the RE forms as well. So what this means is If the buyer makes an offer to the seller, seller makes a counter offer to the buyer. The buyer signs it and accepts it. That's an accepted contract. Once the buyer communicates acceptance back to the seller, then it is a binding contract. So notice of acceptance back to the party who made the last offer or counteroffer. That's what creates a binding contract. So in my example, buyer makes an offer to a seller, seller makes a counteroffer to a buyer, buyer signs it. We have an accepted contract, but it is not a binding contract at that point. It only becomes binding upon the parties when the buyer communicates notice of acceptance. When the buyer notifies the seller they have accepted it, now it is binding upon the parties. So the party that binds it is the party that made the last offer or counteroffer. That's a definition of a binding contract. So let's say a seller receives multiple offers, buyer 1, buyer 2, buyer 3. If the seller sends a counteroffer to all of those, in my example, 3 buyers simultaneously, and they all sign it, the seller, and they all sign it and send it back to the seller has just now sold one house to 3 buyers. We will have 3 legally binding contracts to purchase one house by 3 different buyers. So a couple things, just one comment about highest and best. First of all, you buyer's agents, in this market, we are in September 2021. In any hot market, your buyers, their offer should be their highest and best offer anyway. This is a seller's market with multiple offers and low inventory. So your buyers really should be writing their highest and best offer anyway. You sellers, when you receive multiple offers, you listing agents, when you receive multiple offers and you're going to go back and call for a highest and best, I do not suggest you do that as a counter offer simultaneously to multiple buyers. Now, a seller has the option of just countering one at a time, accepting one, rejecting the others, or the listing agent can notify all the buyer's agents that the seller is going to evaluate all written offers on such and such date. If the buyer wants to revise their offer, please submit another offer. Now, I will caution you, GAR, Georgia Association of Realtors, does have a special stipulation, and it is special stipulation 632. And it is multiple counteroffers used on a counteroffer form. It says, this counteroffer is being made to more than one prospective buyer, notwithstanding any other provision to the contrary contained elsewhere in this counteroffer or in the original offer. Acceptance of this counteroffer will not create an enforceable contract between the buyer and the seller herein, unless it is accepted and delivered back to the seller prior to the following. Number 1, the time limit of the counteroffer, and number 2, prior to the acceptance and delivery back to the seller of this counteroffer by any other prospective buyers to whom the counteroffer has been made. This counteroffer may only be accepted in writing, delivered to the seller's listing broker by fax at the following number, and you put in a fax number. Notice to the seller's listing broker shall be deemed to be notice to the seller, so forth and so on. It goes on and on and on. As a broker, I absolutely do not encourage you listing agents to use that special stipulation. You are setting yourself up for issues proving if a seller makes a multiple counter offer to more than one buyer simultaneously and you get more than one buyer that accepts it and sends it back, you are going to have a difficult time potentially proving which one came back first and which one is the actual binding contract versus the other. So I, as a broker, do not suggest you use that Georgia Association of Realtors special stipulation. I think it is very difficult, and what happens if you're doing this on a weekend and the fax number on there is your brokerage fax and it's not monitored until Monday morning at 9 a.m. or something like that. Anyway, I suggest you do it a different way. But that does bring up a point that I forgot to mention. The offer, counter offer for a binding contract, it must be accepted with notice of acceptance sent back to the last party making the offer, counter offer, prior to the expiration of the time limit of that offer or counter offer. That's what would make a binding contract. So what are some other things that you can do? How would you do this? Well, as I suggested, I think it should be handled if a seller receives multiple offers and wants to either call for a highest and best or make a counter offer. I think it should be done with communication between the listing broker, the broker working with the seller, and the buyer's broker, asking them if any of the buyers want to revise any of their offers and resubmit, that the seller will make a decision on a certain date at a certain time. All right, you listing agents, what do you do to protect your seller and protect yourself? Well, number one, you have your seller figure out which offer they want to either accept or counter or reject. But your seller should only deal with one offer at a time. There are some forms that I highly suggest you use. Okay, let me make a comment before that. In my first example, where buyer made an offer to the seller, seller made a counter offer to the buyer. Let's say that has happened, but now let's say the seller gets another offer that's better that the seller wants to accept. The seller, if they accept this new offer that has come in, and the buyer signs their counter offer and sends it back to the seller before the expiration of that time limit, your sellers are in the same situation. They have now just sold one house to two buyers, the buyer that made the counter offer to and the new offer that came in. So what do? You listing agents, this is true for buyer's agents too, for buyers if they want to withdraw an offer, but you listing agents, if that is the situation, you absolutely need to withdraw the seller's last offer or counter offer. And there is a form in the GAR contract package. The form is, did I not pull it? Let me start with this. In the RE forms contract package, it is form RE 264, unilateral notice of withdrawal of offer. And that has a place to fill in if a seller or a buyer, it's for anybody to withdraw the last offer or counter offer. In the GAR forms, it is F285, notice to withdraw offer or counter offer. Again, this is extremely important for sellers to withdraw any offer or counter offer to one buyer before they are in a position to accept an offer from another buyer, as long as the time limit has not expired. So other forms that will help you listing agents. Once a seller has selected a buyer's offer that they want to go with, then professional courtesy, as well as protecting the buyers and sellers, I highly suggest you notify all the other buyers that had offers on the house, on the property. Let them know that the seller did reject the offer. So GAR has a form. It is GAR form 288, notice to reject offer or counter offer. That is a notification from the seller to the buyer, or it can be offer to buyer, but for purposes of this video, it is signed by the seller. Now, the other issue that has come up is there are a lot of real estate agents that, on behalf of their buyer, in my example, think that perhaps the seller never even saw the offer or counter offer, and they need proof that it was signed from the agent. So there is a new form from GAR called, it is F289, request for confirmation of presentation of offer or counteroffer. And that is not signed by the buyer or the seller. That is just signed between the two agents or brokers to stay in compliance with license law and with the Realtor Code of Ethics regarding presentation of all written offers. There are other forms out there. The RE forms has RE Form 260, which is just a general notification. And the GAR forms has GAR 816 general notice. You could use that form as well. But again, I just wanted to stress upon you the importance that a seller really should not make multiple counter offers to buyers or one counter offer to multiple buyers to prevent them from in a legally binding contract selling one house to more than one buyer, because that is going to have financial and perhaps legal repercussions on the seller. Hope this contract tip helped you out. Thank you so much for watching. Dana Sparks, broker of Maximum One Greater Atlanta Realtors, satisfying your needs with service, innovation, and education.